There comes a moment in a man's life when he begins to understand that after 50, every choice carries a heavier weight. It's not time that destroys a man. It's the relationships that drain his strength, steal his peace, and slowly break the core of who he is. What weakens him is not the passing of years, but the quiet erosion of his spirit by the wrong company, by bonds that demand more than they give. Yet there is a turning point, subtle but absolute, when he learns the value of silence, calm, and freedom. It's the moment when he realizes that sometimes the most intelligent decision a man can make is not to enter another relationship at all. After 50, everything begins to shift beneath the surface. The motivations that once pushed him no longer have the same pull. What once felt vital now feels distant, almost irrelevant. He starts to see how much of his life was spent seeking validation from the world, from women, from his work, even from himself. He ran after recognition, believing that admiration would bring peace. But when he finally pauses and looks back, he sees that all the applause, all the efforts to prove his worth, never gave him the quiet heed for. This is the silent turning point, the moment when strength stops being measured by conquest and begins to live in tranquility. The psychologist Carl Jung once said that the second half of life is the time of individuation, when a man must integrate who he truly is with what the world expects him to be. But that process often feels like a crisis. Many men mistake solitude for emptiness. Yet there's a profound difference between being alone and being at peace. Chosen solitude is freedom. It's the sacred space where a man starts to hear himself again, to think, to rebuild, to understand what truly matters without the noise of having to impress anyone. After 50, the body speaks, time whispers, and finally, the mind falls. Silent, he discovers that real wealth is not about having more, but needing less. It's in this understanding that he begins to free himself from one of the greatest prisons of the modern world, the need to be in a relationship to feel complete. It's not that love loses its meaning, it simply stops being the center of life. The mature man realizes he can love without losing himself, and he can be alone without feeling diminished. That is emotional maturity. When silence becomes more valuable than validation, when peace is more seductive than passion. But most men are not prepared for this shift. Society never taught them how to handle it. Since childhood, they've been trained to chase. Chase women, chase success, chase approval. After decades of running, they finally reach a place that no longer makes sense. Exhausted but unsure how to stop. And then at last, a choice appears. Continue running or begin walking with purpose. Choosing to walk requires courage. The world will tell him he's wrong for no longer wanting to compete. But it's precisely here that real manhood begins. The point where he chooses peace over conflict, focus over distraction. This new vision of life transforms everything. He realizes he no longer has to prove anything. He doesn't need to be desired to feel alive or accepted to feel whole. He starts to choose differently. The people he allows near, the environments he steps into, and above all, the relationships he invests in. Through this quiet filter, a new form of strength emerges, the power of saying no. Saying no to what consumes, no to what drains, no to what disturbs his calm. Saying no to the wrong woman, the wrong job, the lifestyle that inflates the ego but empties the soul. That simple word, no, becomes the sharpest tool of the second half of life. But this awakening comes with a cost. From this point onward, a man must understand that the wrong relationship can be devastating, not only emotionally, but physically, psychologically, and spiritually. Time is too precious to waste on what robs vitality. Research from the Harvard Study of Adult Development, the longest-running study on human happiness and health, revealed something both simple and brutal. Bad relationships make people sick. Constant conflict raises stress hormones, weakens the immune system, and accelerates aging. The Gottman Institute, a global authority on relationship psychology, found that couples who live in ongoing tension show higher levels of inflammation in the body, literally aging themselves from the inside out. In other words, the wrong partner doesn't just take your peace, she takes your years. Many men fail to recognize this because they've normalized emotional exhaustion. They think it's just part of life to argue constantly, to walk on eggshells, to feel perpetually blamed or criticized. But that environment is poison for the male psyche. A man who lives in constant emotional alert enters a silent state of burnout. He grows quieter, retreats from life, loses enthusiasm for the things that once inspired him. When his inner flame fades, he doesn't just weaken physically, his spirit begins to dim. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." And that is exactly what happens when a man insists on staying in a relationship where admiration has died, leaving only tension and habit. The emotional wear accumulates until the body starts to protest. Blood pressure rises, sleep disappears, desire fades, mood collapses. These are not random symptoms. They're the body's way of saying enough. And yet, many men blame themselves for feeling this way. They mistake clarity for weakness. But the body never lies. It knows when it's time to stop carrying the weight of two people. This is when many men finally awaken and realize that being alone is far less lonely than being with someone who quietly destroys you. After 50, time becomes the most precious asset there is. To waste it in relationships that deplete your energy is to waste your life. Every minute spent trying to repair what can no longer be fixed is a minute stolen from your own growth. When a man finally grasps this truth, solitude transforms from punishment into recovery. Peace is no longer a luxury, it's a physiological and emotional necessity. The man who understands this begins to protect his energy. The same way he protects his assets, he learns to say no to relationships that make him sick and starts to rebuild his inner strength. Yet, this clarity brings its own trial, the fear of loneliness. Because even when exhausted, many men remain trapped in destructive relationships simply out of fear. Fear of the silence, fear of being unwanted, fear of disappearing. And that is what leads us to one of the deepest struggles of the mature man: the battle against emotional emptiness and the anxiety of being alone. Loneliness. The word itself carries a shadow, as if being alone were a flaw, a wound, a condition to be cured. But as a man grows older, he begins to understand that loneliness is not the absence of company. It is the absence of connection with oneself. Many men fear solitude because they have never learned how to inhabit it. They rush into relationships, distractions, or noise simply to avoid hearing their own silence. But that silence, if faced with courage, is where truth begins. When a man reaches the second half of his life, he stands at a crossroads. On one side lies dependence, the need to be validated, admired, desired. On the other, sovereignty, the ability to stand alone and still feel complete. Most men never cross that bridge. They remain trapped between longing and fear, unable to let go of what hurts them, yet afraid of what healing might demand. But those who dare to walk into their solitude discover something extraordinary. Peace is not found in the presence of others, but in the alignment of self. This stage of life reveals a paradox. Men often crave connection the most when they finally have the clarity to be selective. They begin to see relationships not as a necessity, but as a choice that must honor their peace. They realize that not everyone deserves access to their time, attention, or emotions. The mature man learns that love without respect is noise, affection without calm is chaos, and passion without purpose is a trap. He becomes more careful with whom he allows into his world, not because he's bitter, but because he finally understands the cost of peace. A man who has rebuilt himself will not trade his silence for drama. He has learned that no companionship is worth losing his clarity again. He doesn't chase attention anymore. He observes energy. He listens more than he speaks. He prefers depth over excitement, loyalty over intensity, understanding over charm. There's something quietly powerful about a man who no longer seeks to be understood by everyone. His mystery is not an act. It's a natural result of inner balance. The calm that once seemed unattainable now radiates from him effortlessly. People may call it detachment, but it's not. It's discernment. He no longer needs to explain himself or justify his boundaries. He simply lives by them. But this transformation doesn't come easily. Often it is preceded by heartbreak, betrayal, or the slow realization that love alone cannot sustain peace. Many men discover that emotional dependency disguised as devotion is what keeps them weak. They gave everything, time, effort, attention, expecting reciprocity that never arrived. And so they learned the hard way that some connections exist only to teach detachment. There comes a moment when he stops blaming others and starts understanding the patterns that led him there. He begins to see that every failed relationship was not a mistake, but a lesson in boundaries. Each heartbreak stripped away an illusion until only truth remained. He realizes that sometimes the most loving thing a man can do for himself and for others is to walk away with dignity. Freedom begins exactly there in the moment. He stops trying to control outcomes. He no longer forces what doesn't flow. He stops explaining what should already be clear. His energy becomes selective, his time sacred, his words rare. He stops chasing people and starts attracting peace. This is not arrogance, it's evolution. Yet, when a man reaches this state of centered calm, something strange begins to happen. People from the past, especially women who once took his presence for granted, start to reappear. It's as if they can sense that he has changed. They feel drawn not to his words, but to his energy. The same man who once begged for attention now becomes magnetic in his stillness. This reversal is not accidental, it's psychological. Women, like all humans, are deeply sensitive to energetic contrast. When a man detaches emotionally and becomes self-contained, he projects a sense of mystery and stability that speaks directly to the subconscious. What once was seen as indifference now feels like power. The same silence that once scared people away now draws them in. But the wise man does not confuse attention with value. He knows that many will be drawn not by love, but by curiosity, by the desire to understand how he became so calm in a world that thrives on noise. And he guards that calm with quiet strength. He knows that peace once achieved must be defended from those who feed on chaos. It's at this stage that a man understands what Stoic philosophy meant by the idea that he who conquers himself is mightier than he who conquers a city. Real power is not control over others. It's control over one's own reactions. The Stoics taught that the greatest freedom lies in emotional independence. Nothing is more liberating than realizing you no longer depend on anyone's approval to feel whole. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." And this freedom for the modern man is not about possessions, status, or even romantic victories. It's about emotional sovereignty, the ability to remain centered no matter what or who comes and goes. That is the true essence of masculine maturity, the stillness that no storm can disturb. In this stillness, he finds creativity again. He rediscovers joy in simple things: the morning silence, the sound of rain, the taste of solitude. He no longer seeks stimulation to feel alive. He realizes that excitement is temporary, but peace is eternal. And with that awareness, he begins to live differently. Every choice, every action, every conversation becomes intentional. He stops reacting and starts responding. People may not understand this version of him. They might call him distant or detached, but the truth is he's just finally comfortable with himself. He no longer needs to fill the silence with noise. He no longer apologizes for his priorities. He finally understands that not everyone is meant to walk beside him, and that's not tragedy. It's alignment. As the years continue, this clarity becomes his compass. The man who once feared being alone now guards his solitude like a sanctuary. He no longer seeks love from need, but from overflow. And when he does choose to love again, it's not from emptiness. It's from abundance. He gives without losing because he knows how to return to himself. In the end, the true measure of a man is not how many people he pleases, but how deeply he honors his peace. A man who has mastered silence radiates strength without aggression, confidence without arrogance, and love without dependency. He becomes both grounded and untouchable, a paradox of calm power. And so the greatest lesson life offers him after 50 is not how to attract others, but how to return to himself. The real conquest is internal. The freedom he once searched for in others was waiting within him all along. It is found in the quiet mornings, in the calm acceptance of what is, in the deep breath that needs no witness. When a man reaches that place, he is no longer at war with time, with love, or with himself. He moves through the world lighter, clearer, freer. He doesn't need to be desired to feel alive. He doesn't need to be admired to feel worthy. He simply is. That is the final form of masculine strength. Not dominance, not control, but serenity, the kind of power that speaks softly yet transforms everything it touches. And if there is one truth he carries forward from this awakening, it is this: peace is the highest form of success. So if you've reached that moment in your life, if you've begun to sense that silence calling, that pull towards solitude, don't resist it. Listen, there's wisdom in the quiet. There's healing in the stillness. It's not the end of anything. It's the beginning of